Okay.
So sorry guys, we had some technical issues. We had to stop the recording, and we hope that we will continue where we left off. Gary, any idea where we stopped?
I think we were just finishing off on the how the Azazel introduced the notion of war and why that was a conflicting sort of concept that a lot of the occultists had said that because it was to permit humankind to defend themselves, so I think we covered that off completely before we were cut off. So
yeah, exactly, and that is where I said that doesn't hold any water, because
yes.
If it had to be introduced, that means to defend ourselves against whom?
I think they introduced the notion of war so that the Nephilim could become very trained warriors and enslave humankind, because they want to obviously destroy humankind so that we can't be raised above angels in the future time. And so I think that's at the heart of that type of knowledge, and that specifically the martial arts and warfare.
Yeah. Another thing where I have been in a mental loop the last couple of days, and I thought that if you're in a loop, you have to ask. Maybe you can help me out here. And I think I have to paint the background a little bit so that everybody can comprehend where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at creation out there in nature, and there's still a lot of beauty out there, even if you have to look for it. What I see is overflowing life. I see abundance. I see sustainability. I see even a sense of humor when I look at animals. So we know that the fallen angels were not rebellious from the get-go. And if you are in that realm and the entire universe is about life, abundance, and what have you, why would you learn in this scenario about warfare? And for what?
So you're asking, the question is why would the fallen angels introduce warfare?
No, why would, okay, if they know about it, that means somebody had to teach it to them, or not?
Sure. Well, they rebelled previous to the creation of the Nephilim, and one expects that there was more than just, hey, we're not going to follow you anymore. One would expect that there was some sort of war, because when we get into the end time and into Revelation 12, we know there's going to be a war in heaven, and they're struggling for the last battle before things are going to be completed, and they're going to be sentenced to the lake of fire. So when we look outside the Bible and we look to other accounts, we see lots of accounts, and particularly with the Hindu version of this angelic rebellion and war. So they invented all of that warfare and fabulous weapons that are so famous in the polytheist versions of prehistory, that I think they invented it so that they could try and rebel, or in case God didn't permit them to leave and to go live in a separate realm. And so once they had that invented, then the only way they can justify their rebellion is, after humankind and the Adamites are created, is to teach them war and have them rebel as well.
Okay. Yeah, I was stuck on, why, if you are living in perfection, why would you even want to learn about warfare. Do you know where I'm coming
Yeah,
from?
and they know how powerful God was.
Mm.
So they knew they likely couldn't win. I don't think they thought they were going to win. They were created immortal without choice, but they were given choice to follow God or not. And once they decided not to, then I think that starts a chain of events. And so they can either surrender and face the consequences, or they can try and rebel and fight for an existence in another realm, and then plead. They've been pleading their case since that rebellion was put down, that the rebellion was justified, and therefore the human parallel is to show all angels who didn't rebel, and that this is what happens with this type of belief system outside of God. It always leads to war. It always leads to destruction. And so that's what I think the whole thing is about. And so I think our struggle with the fallen angels is just coming out of the manifestation of the angelic rebellion that happened before that.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that you mentioned this last time when you talked briefly about Azazel, and you mentioned something that said hung in Orion. What
Yeah.
does that mean?
Well, there's a belief in the occult side that he's actually hung in the constellation Orion. And so, and some people say that's Dudael, as it's mentioned in Enoch. But we also know that in Enoch, he has said that he is put in the abyss. And so, I think this is just an allegory as to, for the occult, that it probably means the same thing. Because I don't think the abyss, though, is in Orion. I think the abyss is in a different dimension in the earth. But this is all part of the allegory that's part of polytheism, right? So, and Orion is a very, very important constellation where a lot of the gods are resurrected to and live there today, particularly in the Egyptian pantheon. And so when I mentioned that he is mentioned as being hung in Orion, that's their belief, and I think it's an allegory.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that it is a fair assessment to say that Azazel waged war on humanity?
I think that's a very, very fair assessment. I think that everything that they did was to destroy humankind and their ability to inherit a position higher than angels in the future time, and their survival would suggest and convict the fallen angels with their original rebellion, which is why they needed to destroy us. But they didn't anticipate, in my opinion, the resurrection. And I think that's why Jesus was still in the grave, as is recorded in First Peter, went to visit these rebellious spirits in the abyss and basically tell them, your rebellion has officially failed. And when I resurrect on the Sunday, humankind will be raised in the future time over you, and you will be sent to the lake of fire.
Mm-hmm. We see throughout all, be it ancient societies or more contemporary ones,
Mm-hmm.
we see a lot of what I call Operation Horned God. We see a lot of horned deities.
Yes.
Starting from the Indus Valley in Mesopotamia, in Greece, it doesn't matter where. Even the pagan rituals have their horned gods. Does that have something to do with Azazel?
Well, he's depicted as a horned, degraded angel god, a devil god. And this is the satyr that we were talking about previously, or the sair as it's called in Hebrew. And we get the satyr transliterated as satyr in the King James Version Bible in Isaiah 13 and Isaiah 34. These are end time prophecies where I won't go down that rabbit trail. It's an interesting story, but way too long to go through here. And it is also the devil gods that are recorded in Leviticus 17 and in Second Chronicles. If you take that back, those devil gods that are being worshipped and are being warned about worshiping goes back to the same word satir.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the devil gods that are being worshipped after the flood. And again, I think that matches up very, very well that these seraphim watchers were degraded to these classification of devil goat gods, and that's why you get gods like Pan, gods like Bacchus in the Roman pantheon, why you have these gods that are being mentioned, and even into the secret societies when they're talking about Baphomet. That's I think is Azazel again, because again those secret societies, they take all of their belief systems back to Azazel as this great god and liberator of them and progenitor of their bloodlines, and they hold him in the highest esteem along with Satan.
Is there also a connection to the bull cult?
Oh, I think so, but not in quite the same manner as what many people might think, because this is a horned goat god. The bull cult is actually part of the Enochian mysticism that's created before the flood. So it's a bull cult and a sun cult. And the bull cult is created in their devotion to astrology and celestial procession, and in the age of the zodiac of the bull. So I think that's where all of that goes back to. And in the sun cult, whether or not it is the Egyptian bull cult, which also has a calf in it, or it's the Molech cult after the flood, or it's in the Minotaur aspect of it. This is all sort of back to those sort of ancient sort of roots of what the original religion was all about.
Molech was connected to child sacrifice, correct?
Yes, as what Azazel is,
Mm.
as what Baal is, and Molech is the son of Baal.
Okay. What a nice guy.
Yeah. And Baal is son of the god in the Canaanite pantheon, El, which was like one of the parent gods, just as Kronos would be a parent of Zeus in the Greek mythology. And so you have sort of a chain there, and I think there's this relationship between, Satan and Azazel. They're separate, but Satan would head up the pantheon, would be like El in the Canaanite pantheon, or one of the parent gods in one of the other pantheons. But certainly Azazel is his right-hand man, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. The man for the dirty work.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so where do the Anunnaki tie in here?
Well, the Anunnaki are, again, the same basic story as what's being told in Genesis. So you have earthly Anunnaki who become the giants and the demigods, and you have the heavenly Anunnaki. And you have the god An, who is the parent god like El is, or Kronos might be one of the parent gods in the Greek pantheon. So, they create these demigods through human females that become the kings and the rulers. So the only difference really in terms of what's going on with the Sumerian account is that you have, in some of the depictions of the gods, a little different depiction. You have a raven type of bird type depiction of an Anunnaki god, but you also have the serpentine gods as well. And so I think this is, again, one of those standards that sort of goes around the earth, so that where you have plumed serpent gods like in Central America, or the Naga gods in India, and the dragon creators in China, and of course put wings on a serpent, you have a dragon, and in this case, the heavenly dragons. You also have a Garuda god, which is a bird god that is the enemy of the Nagas in India. You also have the Tengu gods, who also create these bird-like beings that also create orders of priests and orders of warriors and a ruling class, just like the Nagas do and the serpentine beings that we talked about. So I think this is just showing another associate type of order of gods that are ruling with the seraphim angels, or they have an ability to shapeshift and take a different look, which is again another possibility. Just as you have lion gods that or lion men that go back to probably who the occult people would say Ariel, even though you've got other lion gods like Bast as a female in Egypt, you have Sekhet, you have Mahi, you have many lion gods around in other pantheons, because again, they all are basically the same pantheon, just different vernacular names, who also produce these linemen and seemingly another type of Nephilim. But it seems to be the serpentine ones that were the most dominant and the most prevalent.
Let's talk a little bit about the symbols connected to Azazel. What do you think of the red cross, that has something to do with Azazel?
Yeah, it's an interesting choice for a symbol for blood. And so let's first of all let everybody know, if they're not aware of it, and I think if you've been doing any research in the genre at all, is that the Nephilim were known for drinking blood. And blood drinking is still part of the occult societies today. And blood is also, as in blood sacrifice, they demanded sacrifices to the gods and the demigods. And this is, again, what goes down through history and I believe is maintained in the higher levels of the secret societies. And so now we have blood and we have this Red Cross. And then you have this organization called the Knights Templar, who also have a Red Cross. And the Knights Templar were an organization that were a Gnostic organization, which the secret societies are all Gnostic organizations. And you had this Knight Order that had this Christian gloss on the surface. And then you had the Priory of Sion, which was the inner core, which then splits away in 1188 because they believe the Templars have lost their way and have also lost Jerusalem in 1187. And from there you have a creation of this organization that is going to organize all the other and start all the other organizations that we know of today, whether it's the Jesuit order or it's the Freemasons. This is going to be that conduit and parent society after the fall of the Templars that reorganizes and keeps things from being under one central organization that's exposed as with what the Templars were. And the Rosicrucians, I mean, Rosicruce is basically a red cross, right, as you translate that. And I don't find that to be a coincidence, because the Rosicrucians, in their operative style as opposed to their speculative style, which is they like to talk about. Operative was using the knowledge from the angels, where they believe they got this ancient knowledge from, and in practice, until, as opposed to the speculative side, which is the application in more of a theoretical and scientific manner. So, and that's how they define it within sort of the cult, an operative and a speculative. So alchemy is the sort of the science that is a conglomeration of many of these sciences and illicit knowledge that is so powerful it could destroy the world if you believe what they say in their writings. And so the Rosicrucians are connected back to Azazel, right? And they believe in the pentagram as well, just as Baphomet was the god the Templars worship. This is, as we mentioned earlier, a parallel god or the same god as Azazel. And I think in this case, they're honoring the same god, another goat god. And Azazel is usually depicted with a pentagram. And of course, a pentagram in ancient Babylonians was a sign of knowledge and wisdom. And Azazel is usually the one that's hung in this pentagram, and a pentagram is a 5-pointed star, which is that allegory we're referring to about Orion later. So when he's shown as hung in there, in an X sort of form with his arms open at the top and his legs open at the bottom, as being hung in that, he is the goat of Mendes, or the goat of alchemy, and he is the the 10th archon of Capricorn. And these are all, again, imageries going back to the god that they honor. And in their connection to Freemasonry as starting one of these other organizations, which is led by the St. Clairs or the Sinclairs, which also go back to the founding as the St. Clairs as the battle partner of Hugh de Payan, Henry de St. Clair. The Sinclair descendants in Scotland are going to offer protection to the Templars and start the Freemasonry order. And then the Sinclairs are going to build Rosslyn Chapel, which is a taciturn story in stone in honor of their genealogies, their history, and they have this angel that's hung upside down with ropes on it, ropes leading away, that forms a couple of Zeds, which are the 2 Zeds in Azazel. And this is the god that they honor the highest next to Satan. And so when we look at the red cross symbol on the blood, this is, I think, showing their control over it. And it's not that I don't believe sharing blood and transfusion of blood is not a good thing. It's just not what I believe to be all of the applications that they're using with the blood. And I think it gives them access to the blood and control on it. And they're telling us, because they like to hide everything in plain sight with their iconology, just as we talked about with what Pope Francis is doing in terms of uniting the religions, the first part of the show. This is an MO of the secret societies and the Gnostic religions, that they are using the blood that they're collecting for other purposes than just for blood transfusions.
Mm-hmm. So we have Azazel, who brings the concept of warfare to humanity. One of his symbols is the Red Cross. And then we have this Red Cross organization that allegedly, we are here to help. We go into war-torn regions carrying this symbol, and you can donate to us.
Yes. It's quite sinister when you start pulling the layers back, and it just shows you how much control they have over the world today and have had, although they've not been able to accomplish what they want. But it just shows you the size of the Leviathan, so to speak, that we're dealing with here, and how entrenched this organization is.
Mm. So in other words, they make no bones of it. I mean, no bones about it, that they carry it right into your face. The Red Cross, the symbol of blood, and they let you know right from the get-go. Mm-hmm. If you're smart enough to decode it, what is really going on.
Yes, I think so. I think so. And they're that arrogant, and they know most people are asleep. And those who are awakened are to, who they are and what their imagery represents, are too few to stop them.
Yeah, I think so. Do we have a female character that goes along with Azazel?
Well, we do. Typically, it's the female goddess that heads up the pantheons, like Isis or Ishtar would probably be the most famous one, that comes out of Sumeria, that is more directly connected with Azazel, but understand whether it's Gaia, or whether or not it is Isis, whether or not it's Ashtaroth. These are all the same name for the same female goddess. And so you get this connection because this is the woman that learns the names of the angels in the name of God, and a lot of the knowledge comes to humans through these females that they take as partners. And so there is a connection there, and they actually make that connection in some of their occult sort of imagery, right? And the mother goddess is a significant aspect in the duality of polytheist religions. And you have matriarchal bloodlines just as you have patriarchal bloodlines. But the point I was going to make was in terms of the occult, where they like to make that sort of emphasized in their, let's say, the tarot cards would be one example. And you have the hearts, which are the feminine side, which also means a cup, right? Or a grail, which is the grail bloodline. And also the symbol for the grail and is this sort of V shape like this. And of course, that's what you also form with the heart part at the top, is that same sort of form. And so the male form of that is the spades or the swords or the axe of the weapons of the patriarchal bloodline. And so what's interesting about that is the ancient form for the male is this, which is you get for that spade sort of coming up as the top, the form of that point, right? And what's interesting in terms of how you connect those two in terms of what we're talking about, Ishtar or Ashtaroth or Isis, is that I mentioned that Azazel was the 10th archon of the age of Capricorn, which is some sort of really deep occult meaning that I'm not quite sure of, but that's what he's called. And he's associated with the number 10. And as you're well aware of, is that the X, which is the Roman numeral for 10, is a symbol for Azazel. And of course, you put the feminine symbol meeting the male symbol, and you get the X, and that's supposed to be the symbol. So I think that's representing his pantheon of that second tier of gods that ruled over the earth in the ancient world. So I look at all of this sort of allegory is all there for their genealogies and for their appreciation. But again, understand that these are the same symbols that are in the playing cards that everybody does with today, and they're essentially dealing and playing with occult symbols and rituals that has all of this encoded and is there in plain sight again.
Yeah, the 10, like in 10 Downing Street.
Yeah. And there was 10 kings to the Atlantean Empire, which was considered the helm of world government. And 10 is the number that Daniel speaks of the 10 empires in the end time, as does Revelation. And when we talk about Azazel being released in the end time, I don't think all of that is a coincidence. I think he will be back ruling over the 10 in the end time. Now, does that suggest, was there 10 separate empires or civilizations in the antediluvian world? I don't know, but I know the number 10 is an antediluvian constant in all the different pantheons and mythologies around the world in terms of naming 10 kings, for example, before the flood, or 10 patriarchs. So there's a meaning there in the 10 that Azazel has been overlaid with Azazel that I think we're going to see and define more of as we get closer to the end time.
Mm. When you talked about this V,
yes,
it's a little bit more spread.
Yep.
And I also see this same sign on military uniforms.
Yeah.
I think it indicates rank.
Yep, it does. And again, I don't think any of the symbol or imagery that we get in the military or government or anywhere is there by fluke. I think it is always there by design. And it doesn't matter where you look. I mean, if you look at something as awful as the KKK in North America, and understanding that that is just another secret society, and understand that it is an invention out of Southern Freemasonry just after the Civil War there. You understand K is the 11th letter of the alphabet, and there's 3 of those. That's 11, 11, 11. That makes 33, which is, the Scottish Rite level to become an adept at the time when the Scottish Rite is being introduced into Freemasonry. This is never coincidental. This is all how they always define everything they're involved in. And so that's why you have all of these dragons and eagles and phoenixes and lions and all sorts of things that are in all sorts of coats of arms and government seals and representations. It all reflects this, and it's hidden in plain sight. Whether or not it's like a double cross of Lorraine, which comes out of the Templars and the bloodlines representing the second bloodline, or you have going back to Rosie Crucis, and you have crux as being the hieroglyph for light, which is also connected into Lucifer, and the 3 letters that sort of come out of the Latin version of that word. They are the letters for light in terms of how that translates out. And crux was also a Latin word for tree, and it comes in 3 versions of symbols. You have
So, okay, guys, I'm very sorry we had another technical issue. Gary was frozen, and that has never happened to me before. Okay, it is what it is, and now Gary will continue. Go ahead, Gary.
And if I'm picking up in the right location, I was just talking about the word crux in the Latin, and the symbol for that and the meaning for that is tree. In Latin, and it has 3 symbols for that, which is the typical sort of T for a tree, it has the cross like this for a tree, and it also has an X for the same symbol. And when I mentioned that there were 3 letters which crux derives from, of course, in the normal version of the T or the cross, there's only 2 versions there, but that's a reference to the double cross of Lorraine and the bloodlines of the royal bloodlines that we were talking about earlier, so that you would have a cross that has 2 crosses in it. And of course, the interesting symbol about that, now that I'm on a bit of a roll on that, if you join those 2 crosses, and they're on an Oreo cookie, if you want to have, anybody has an Oreo cookie they want to have a quick look at, that forms what is a double-headed axe in their belief system, which was one of the favorite weapons of the Nephilim again. So again, they just have so many different layers to their history and their genealogy that they encode in everything, and also in plain sight. And so when we think about what they are encoding into the language that they're hiding everything in plain sight, understand that, as I link this back to the red cross, is that comes out of that same symbolism, because that's one of those 3 variations that they're playing off of, right? So they do a lot of sort of playoffs on these symbols that you would accept as normal. You accept that as normal because the Knights Templar made that cross famous, which is an ancient cross that goes back to the Anunnaki, and it's shown in a few reliefs where you have that Maltese cross, because that's not the normal cross. And then the Maltese cross is the cross that they're referring to in their symbolism. And of course, they get that chance to play off of because Jesus was crucified on a cross, right? And so it's a perfect opportunity for them to hide their imagery in Christian imagery.
Yeah. And it's, as you said, it's encoded in everything and anything, and there is hardly a way to get around that. You will stumble on it everywhere you look.
Yeah, they are corrupting the whole world with their symbolism so that everything has that sort of stamp of their control and approval and governance on. But they have that for a time. It's their world for a time.
Yeah. Time to end this. Could you, in your chapter, The Mother of All Sorceries, you say a lot about the symbolism, iconography, and how they are, for instance, Mary, that is usually not the Mary that most people think of, and how that works.
Yeah, so everybody's quite familiar with the Virgin Mary apparitions. And so there's two aspects to this in terms of their beliefs. This is not Mary, Mother of Jesus, that's being talked about. And understand this Mary cult thing is essentially part of the polytheist beliefs, and it has invaded with its imagery the Catholic Church. And I believe most Catholics believe they're talking about Mary, Mother of Jesus. But they believe in their belief system is that Our Lady is Mary Magdalene, the wife of Jesus, who allegedly produces offspring in their belief system, which is one of those crosses in the double cross of Orion, one of those bloodlines, because those two bars represent two bloodlines, an Nephilim bloodline and one that goes back to Mary Magdalene and Jesus. But in the great understanding, just as she's like the mother of Jesus's offspring, right? So this is actually Isis or Ishtar or the other mother goddesses that we're talking about. So the apparitions that took place in the 90s, which I talk about in this chapter in the book, The Mother of All Sorceries, appears as the woman in Revelation 12. Exact same description. And this is the same Mary apparition that is in Lourdes or in Fatima, or the same apparition that Joan of Arc saw, and who was heavily involved with the Lorraine bloodline to get control of the French throne and defeat the English, and the double cross of Lorraine that we're all talking about. So again, understand all of this is always connected. Just as Francis of Loyola had visions of Mary as part of his inspiration to start the Jesuit society as their mythos goes. So all of this is always sort of interconnected. And so this is going to be part of how they create this universal religion in the end time, I think, because we're going to see more of these Mary apparitions, and she initiated 3 children in Medjugorje to come out at a certain time in the future, and is going to present, you guessed it, 10 warnings to the world that if they don't convert to the one world religion, a disaster is going to come. There's going to be 10 of these warnings. And when I said there's going to be contrived disasters to push the universal religion over the edge, I believe this is what's going to be part of it.
Yeah. Wow, that was very interesting. Thank you for that. But when you were talking about it, I thought, even in Islam, they talk about Mary.
Oh, Mary is a very, very important figure. So more so in the Quran as opposed to the Hadiths, because the Hadiths are an oral tradition created by each of the varying sects. So they have a whole bunch of different Hadiths where they take the meaning of what's in the Quran and shape it to however they want it to mean. But in the Quran, she is said to be the virgin who receives the implantation from the Holy Spirit and delivers Jesus the Messiah. So a very important figure in Islam as well as in Christianity. So this has the ability to cross over in part of that deception to most all religions in the world, and the Kabbalistic part certainly in the Jewish religion, which is, you know, heavily influencing Judaism today.
The only difference is people will probably not notice that this is not the Mary they thought it was.
Yes, it's actually either a demon spirit or a angelic spirit. But it's amazing, and I write in the book on the description of this, and if you go and look at that as Revelation 12, it's the same description, a whole different sign, but they're going to use that. And we're already seeing the sign of Revelation 12 being misused with astrology signs, where people were calling for the start of the rapture in the last 7 years. And the timing of that sign is 3.5 years into the end time, and it has nothing to do with astrology or this apparition of Mary. It has to do with a sign that's going to be at the time of the abomination, that Judah and then awakening Israel are going to be fleeing Satan and Antichrist and will be protected by God for the last 3.5 years. But people will be deceived. They use partial truth. That's the thing.
Yeah. And it works very well so far.
It works very well, yes.
As you know, to wrap this up, this actually does not really have something to do with the subject of Azazel, but it's just something that's puzzling my mind. When we look at how the character Jesus is presented, usually it's either he is a baby in diapers, or he is dying on a cross. In both instances, he is more or less, powerless. At least he is not giving the impression of King of Kings. So I'm wondering, why is that, Gary? Why is he always presented in that way?
It's to suppress that notion of who he really is, and to prepare people to accept the lie that he wasn't who Paul said or the New Testament describes him as, and they're going to make that play in the end time, and they're going to degrade Paul as a false prophet, and they're going to say he never was resurrected. He was a Christ consciousness character, as what Buddha was, and that Antichrist is the true Christ in the end time. And it's all going to be part of the deception. So they're going to say he did not die on the cross, and he had descendants, and Antichrist has that pedigree. And so he was a prophet, and he's like Hermes, he's like Zoroaster, he's like Muhammad, he's like all, but he's not the Word of God, right? He's not made flesh, come from God and went back to him. So it's all to sort of lower people's aspirations beforehand and set the table to accept the bigger lies that they're going to bring. And believe me, there is going to be so much brainwashing, so much delusion and deception. And, you know, if you're not totally immersed in what Scripture actually says, you're not going to be buckled up well enough to survive what's coming at us. So be prepared that they're going to use every type of deception that they can to deceive us in the end time.
Yeah, I remember when I was a little child, one of my grandmothers, she had this huge cross in the kitchen with a very, very pronounced suffering Jesus on it.
Yep.
And I was like 3 or 4 years old. I didn't have a clue.
Yep.
But I remember that I couldn't stomach that sitting in that room. I felt drained. And I always thought as a little kid, what are you doing here? You're sitting here having coffee and there's a dying man. So I remember that very, very well, that I always thought that is weird.
Well, and it's crazy because I know the resurrection is everything our religion is built on. But you'd also think that churches would, if they're going to show imagery and Christians are going to show imagery, they would show God more, or show Jesus more sitting at God's right-hand side right now, or coming back at the time for the rapture, or something more glorious than how he's kind of presented. But that's just my opinion. So I think you raise a very, very good point. And I do believe it's to sort of dumb down who Jesus actually is.
Yeah, because if he's never presented as King of Kings, but always in a helpless position, then yeah, you can lose it.
Yep.
Mm. Wow, Gary, what a great presentation again. I'm very, very sorry that we had all these technical difficulties, but things happen.
It's amazing when we talk about these kind of subjects, and not just with you, these things will happen. And I don't believe that's a coincidence. Maybe it is, but it happens way too often, especially when we're into the secret societies and Azazel. So it's, I expect that there'll be these things when we're talking about this subject.
Yeah, I thank you for your patience, Gary. The first one was really bad, but we somehow made it work again. And so, Gary, do you have any final thoughts for us?
No, I just, I think the thing is that we're seeing a world that is starting to go crazy in a number of different ways, and that's just going to ramp up. And the birth pangs will get stronger and stronger in so many aspects, and people need to learn. They need to learn about what's going on, what's the history of what's going on, and they need to learn about prophecy, and they need to be prepared, because we're moving into an age unlike anything that we've seen before, with the power and the technology and control, that even the elect will be deceived, and we need to take that warning to heart. Otherwise, we're going to be the ones that are deceived. So what I would suggest is, you can't learn everything all at once, but start to learn more. Take the time to learn about these things, so that not only can you understand yourself, but hopefully help some other people and plant seeds with other people, that when they see certain things, it'll start to trigger with them, and hopefully they'll awaken before it's too late. Yeah.
And do not fight under YouTube videos among each other.
Yes, exactly.
And even call the other one idiot, or even worse. That is not helpful.
No, it's not. No, it certainly isn't.
Okay, thank you, Gary, so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful talk once again, and I hope you come back again.
I will.
And so, sorry for all the technical issues. This was Night Flight for today. We finally made it, but I hope you still enjoyed it. So good night and goodbye. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thanks.